Thanks, first of all, for inviting me here. Basically what I do is all things connected to biking and walking. So that goes from policy to doing designs with engineers. Even though I'm not an engineer, I talk to them about how they can improve their designs so that they become more bikeable and walkable. We also do lots of programs such as Safe Routes to School, Share the Road, Bike to Work Day is a big one. We're the ones responsible for designing the bicycle and scenic byways roadmap for Colorado. We distribute about 40,000 of these a year. So people call us from all over the world to get these, and we distribute them everywhere. It's our bike manual, which is also used. We distribute about 40,000 of these too. Schools use them, different fire departments use them, police use them. I mean, everybody does. And it's got all kinds of really great tips on riding, everything from what to wear to rules of the road to state statutes. So this is something else that our department does, and we brought some of these too. Kathleen told me that Fort Collins didn't have this. We just revised this past year, so get it while it's hot. It's brand new. And then we also have some special projects, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a project towards the end of this that is really groundbreaking for us, and it's our bicycle pedestrian counting program. And it doesn't sound very exciting, but it is. It's making a big, big difference in how we're looking at how we make decisions and how we can actually quantify and qualify why we have bicyclists on basically on our trails and some of our roadways. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is CDOT's new bike policy. DOT has had a bikes and pedestrian person for probably about 20 years. And way back in '77, the department had decided that they were going to produce a policy that was very friendly to bicycles, and it was very warm, and it was just wonderful, you know, in the sense that very foresighted in talking about how bikes are important, they're good transportation modes, that we need to do these things for bikes to make our state better and easier. Well then, you know, if you think about in the late '70s, that's when we were dealing with the gas crisis. The gas crisis ended, and the policy just kind of drifted away, and nothing ever really happened to it. So a couple years ago, we felt that it was a good time to bring a new policy to place. And Kathleen was part of this effort. It took us about 2.5 years to do this, but this is monumental in the history of our DOT. And if you look at what's written in the red there, the needs of bicyclists and pedestrians shall be included in the planning, design, and operation of transportation facilities as a matter of routine. Now, how many of you even have thought about how we construct our roadways and how bike facilities are included in those roadways? A few of you do. Well, as you probably are aware then, that in most cases, prior to this policy, if we had a roadway project that included a bike and pedestrian facility, if budgets got tight, sometimes that project just kind of got cut. It was looked at more as an amenity, as a requirement. So this policy puts it in place that we are required by statute now, not just policy, statute, because this has been turned into law, that we have to accommodate bikes and peds in every project that we do. So our projects become a bike and pedestrian project as well as just a roadway project. So that's big. So you guys should be going, yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah. And so there are 3 ways that people can get out of this. And this is really kind of interesting to me too, because I was talking to one of the engineers that was helping me on this project, and he had said, well, you know, a good engineer will find a way out of anything because we're problem solvers. So if we have to, you know, figure out how to not have bikes and peds in it, we'll do that. And it's, you know, and I think he's exaggerating to a point, but we did have, these are federal highway requirements as well, so that if, as an example, if a bicycle project costs more than 20% of the overall roadway project, then it can be eliminated. Doesn't mean it will be, but it can be. Another one is if the cost of the bikeway or the pedestrian facility is more than 20% of the whole project. So that's one. If bicyclists are just not using the facility, if it's some rural road that works well without an additional facility, that's a way to do it. And if there's just no population, then that's the way. So those are the 3 ways that can be used to eliminate a facility, but doesn't mean it will be. So we have this new policy, who cares? Big deal. Well, it means a lot, because as part of this policy then, we also have another document that is called a procedural directive. And the procedural directive is what explains how we will implement the policy. So what we have written into that procedural directive are these items, such as creating the first ever statewide bicycle and pedestrian plan. That's big, 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 folks. And you'll have an opportunity to participate in that. The plan is going to not just look at corridors, but we're going to look at a lot of different things that go into that plan. How do we look at maintenance as part of a statewide plan? How do we look at high-use corridors? How do we look at connections to schools and connectivity from one community to another? All those types of things go into a plan, and we're just going to be starting to work on that this fall, and hopefully by next year we'll have a real good jump on it and get it going. So that's big. Chapter in the roadway design manual. Now, if you take a look at how engineers design roadways, most of the time they take a look at a manual that gives them all the information that they need in order to create their project, whether it's a bridge or a road or a sidewalk. They have these manuals that help explain to them how to build this. Well, we don't have a manual that explains how to build bike and pedestrian specific facilities. So unless they have gone to extra training or have researched it themselves, we don't have a document that tells them how to do any of this. So, how are you going to build something if you don't know how to build it? So we're currently working on that roadway design manual right now. And again, this doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's huge, because if you don't have a reference to do something, you're just not going to do it. It just becomes too complicated. So we're going to make it easier for people to follow rules and regulations and actually create the facilities that makes it easier for us to bike and walk. The other part of this is maintenance agreements. When we first started doing this, it was really interesting to me, because some of our maintenance people that I talked to, and I'm not just talking CDOT, I'm talking about other community maintenance people too. The comment was, well, why should we be doing this anyway? Because no one bikes and walks. No one does this. We don't need to do this. Well, I mentioned a little earlier about a counting program on our trails. So I was able to throw out how many bicyclists and pedestrians we'd been counting within a certain time frame. And the maintenance engineers just dropped their jaws and said, "You're kidding, we have a couple thousand people doing that?" It's like, yeah, we do. And that's just on one trail. So we were able to revise some of our maintenance plans and ideas and how we go about clearing trails. And that's all because of this policy coming into place. So now we're looking at, well, what does it mean then to maintain a trail? Does it mean to keep it plowed all year? Does it mean to keep the weeds cut? Just how frequently we do that. So that's all part of what we're doing as well. And then outreach and information are things like doing this, coming out and talking to you folks, and doing our brochures, and working with police departments on different issues, and making sure that people understand the rules of the road. So those are some of the things that's what's important about this policy. And then, like I say, this got codified into law just this past year. A representative from this area, Representative Kafalis, is the one that brought that forward and liked it so much. So that too then makes a big difference in that if we have a change in administration, then a new director just can't come in and say, well, we're not going to do that policy anymore. Now it's law. So it's going to be around for a while. So these are some of the programs. I like to say that I actually work in the unit of potpourri at CDOT, because we do so many different things. Even though we're the bicycle and pedestrian unit, we do all these different programs. So everything having to do with safe routes to school, which I'm guessing a lot of you folks are familiar with. It's to help kids K through 8th grade bike and walk to school more frequently. So that's one of our programs. Our Share the Road program is an annual program where we actually try to reach out to the public and get them to understand that everybody uses the roadway. So it's not just motorists, it's not just truckers, it's not just bicyclists. Everybody uses it, and so we should be courteous to each other and make it safer for all of us. Our Scenic Byways program, those are basically identified roadways that have either historical or beautification aspects to them. And so that's a program that falls within my unit as well. And it's kind of just one of these that's it's just sort of out there, and where does it really belong? So give it to the Bike and Ped unit. And we love it. We're also working on a Bike the Byways program, which you'll be seeing fairly soon coming out of Bicycle Colorado. They have a contract with us to implement the program that helps people actually participate by biking either through the byways or using it as a base camp and then biking different areas from that byway. So, and you'll see on our new map too, we have specifically identified byways as part of that map. Bike to Work Day, are you folks all Bike to Work Dayers? I was amazed when I heard DK tell me that this year you had 50 some breakfast stations. I was amazed at that. I mean, when I was here, I thought it was great because we had about 20. And I thought, man, I'm really doing a great job. So kudos to you folks for getting that in place, because that's great. That's terrific. I work with other communities throughout the state on Bike to Work Day, so I'm always working with different areas and trying to get them to be more motivated and bring in different groups and stuff. So it's really wonderful to see that Fort Collins has really just taken off on its own, and I really don't have to do too much with you guys. Just say, yeah, go. And then a program that many of you may not be aware of is our Congestion and Mitigation Air Quality Program. It's also called CMAQ. And that program is to help improve our air quality by reducing congestion. So funding for that, again, is federal money, but it helps implement different bicycle and pedestrian programs, because the more you bike, the better the air quality and the less congestion you have. So those are some of the programs that fall within my purview and what we work with on at CDOT. So what's new? What's happening with our programs? When I'm sitting in a meeting and working with different people, I have a lot of connections that I work with. People from the health department, people from Parks and Rec, people from state parks, people from housing and urban development. I mean, you start thinking about all the different groups that you work with, and how do you decide what's the best course of action for you to take to improve biking and walking in our state. And it's amazing to me that within different areas, if you look at health, everything is data-based. Everything is tested, and they do surveys, and everything that they do is decided because of some results that they have had. And with biking and walking, we don't really have a lot of data. We have some aspect where we can count the number of people that come to a breakfast station, and then we can kind of surmise, well, that's the number of people who are biking. But we really don't have specific information on where are they going, how long are they riding, what are the routes that they're taking, what are their needs, what would they like to see. So we've been starting to look at how can we do better data collection on our bicyclists and our walkers to figure out those answers, and then actually make some decisions based on that. That's where we come into maintenance, planning, different opportunities that help us make those better decisions. And this is what I want to talk to you primarily about tonight, because this is so new. Must have been almost a year ago. There was a national organization that was doing a national bicycle and pedestrian count, and I'm not sure if Fort Collins participated or not, but they were wanting communities throughout the country to take a count on a specific day or a specific week, and that way they could get a national number. So I went to our traffic analysis person and said, you know, is there a way that we could participate in this? I think that this would be good, because we really haven't done anything, and you know, we need to find some volunteers and help us make this thing happen. Well, being the tech person that she is, she was like, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to come up with some equipment, we're going to find somebody to sponsor this, and we're going to start making counts that really count. So in the past, when, and this is actually a true story here, that when you normally would go out to count someone, you would have somebody physically standing on a corner or a specific location, a little counter in their hand, and as somebody went by, you'd go click, and you would count. Now this happened actually in Denver, where somebody was in a high-rise building with binoculars, and once a month he'd go out and he'd look out on a trail, and he wouldn't even go out of the building. He would just look out on the trail and count the number of people. So as the bicyclist would go by, he'd count that, and he'd count all the other ones, and then that's the number that he would come up with. And this was the standard routine that we used. I mean, this was okay by people. So our person found this company called EcoCounters, which is actually an international company that has this device that counts people on trails. Now, there are different devices that are out there, but this one in particular counts direction. And most people don't think that that's a big deal until you start looking at data and analyzing it. And direction is everything. So this company, I have to laugh at this because our traffic analysis person is so good. She gets this person to give us a pilot. Let's do a pilot. So we've been piloting this for almost a year now. And we thought, let us use it for a month, 2 months, and we've still got it. So we picked 2 different trails within the Denver metro area, and we put this on here. So this one happens to be on the Cherry Creek Trail. So basically a bicyclist goes by, and the little counter then counts it as the person rides by. Pretty basic, simple stuff. So that person just got counted by a radar beam. It's amazing. It's amazing how this is helping us in identifying how many users we have and the direction they go. It's also telling us things that we had no idea about. You know, when you go into these things, you kind of have your mind that, oh, you're just going to get some numbers and yeah, that's going to be great. Well, in this particular case, we found out that on both trails, one is on Cherry Creek and one we have on the C470 trail farther south in Denver, if any of you are aware of that. Both of them are going, we have more traffic going outbound than we have inbound. Now, Cherry Creek is a high profile area. And we thought that we would have a lot more people heading into town in the morning, going to offices and stuff, but they're not. They're actually going south, and we're guessing that they're going to the tech center or high employment areas in that area, because we have fewer numbers coming back. But it's blown our mind that we have a couple thousand people on that trail every single day. Now there are some weather conditions, and we have also found out that if we have snow and if the trail is not cleared, then it just drops to 0. People just don't ride. So maintenance is a huge factor in how people are using these trails. Same thing happened on our C470 trail. We have far, far fewer numbers on that because of its location. But again, it's amazing to me that we have consistently several hundred riders at that location every single day. And again, when the weather gets bad, it goes to 0, but it's still big numbers compared to, most people don't think that you have that many riders on a simple trail. And that's what this information is telling us. And then we can also track the seasonal changes to it, as well as if there's a snow day or if it's a rain day or if it's a real sunny day, we're getting some of this information. This is the kind of stuff that our traffic analysis unit looks at. I'm not a data analyst, so when I first looked at these, it was just like, oh, you're just blinding me here, tell me what this means. But they start to look at it, and you can start seeing some of the patterns are the same on some of the days. And you can also start to identify that there's an actual commute pattern to this. Whereas now, if I'm just looking at it, I'm just seeing graphs, and it doesn't help me at all. But if you're an analyst, you can start seeing that, okay, well, there are peaks and valleys. And so these are all like on Mondays and Tuesdays, and you can see that the Mondays and Tuesdays have a somewhat similar pattern to them. The weekends have a similar pattern. Thursday and Friday is somewhat closer to each other. So we don't know why that is. But when you're starting to look at how do you plan for bike facilities, then you can also identify that people are using these for commuting. This is definitely a commuter pattern because we see the same exact thing in motorized traffic. And that's the real clue here. It's the same as motorized traffic. So this is the kind of stuff when you start collecting it for months. This is from September to April. And again, you can't really tell everything from this because it's just too tight. But when you start breaking it apart by hour and by day, you can start again seeing these patterns emerge. So this is a composite of showing we have a weekend pattern, which is the high arch there. And then the other patterns are commute patterns. And again, if you lay these over motorized information, you're going to see the same thing. This is amazing information for us. And I keep going back to it because we have never done it like this before. Colorado is one of the only states in the country that is doing this. Kaiser Permanente was so interested in this that they helped fund some of these counters for us. And we're going to be working with them on collecting information as well and sharing that information. Part of this is also going to go into a data warehouse where we collect traffic information from all different communities in the state. And this will become part of it. So we have traffic counters that are going out now to our different regions. CDOT has 6 regions in the state and plus headquarters. So we're going out and placing these different monitors in trails and in roadways to making some of this happen. Just starting to collect data on what's really happening out there. And again, this is big because now we can go and say, we have several thousand commuters every day that use this trail. That's big. And this is just to show you a comparison. Remember how I talked about somebody stands on a corner and you count one day or a month or whatever? This is the kind of information that would reflect. So it's a real good example that why that information really doesn't do you any good. When you're trying to analyze what's a trend, what's a usage, an hour a month or an hour a week or however you do it, just one period of time is not going to give you the same information. So that's what this is supposed to show you. This is something that I just wanted to share with you that on Bike to Work Day, since we had the monitors out there for Bike to Work Day, we found that at every single location where we have them, and I think we have 5 in Denver metro area now, that at every single site on Bike to Work Day, there was an increase of at least 48% of ridership. Now, you also have to remember that the numbers are fairly low, so when you see at one location we had more than 1,000 increase, 1,000% increase, well, you're talking about, well, if you have a couple hundred compared, and now Bike to Work Day you have, 500 on it or something, you're going to get big percentage changes. So you need to keep that in mind. Again, that's showing us that Bike to Work Day has an effect. What's happening to them then for the rest of the year? That's what I keep wanting to, it's like, okay, where are you? The last thing I wanted to share with you is we took that same information and we compared it then with motorized traffic. So if we had a higher bike and pedestrian use on Bike to Work Day, what did we have as far as motorized goes? And we found out that throughout those same 5 locations, we had a minimum of 0.35% reduction in motorized traffic, and at the high end was almost a 3% reduction. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but again, that's huge, and we've never had that kind of information before. So those are some of the things I wanted to just share with you. I also wanted to introduce some folks that are helping me with our Share the Road campaign this year. Joan Sabat, and did I say that right? Sabat like rabbit, and Jonathan Barsh are helping us do a special program this year. Our Share the Road is taking a different tack. Normally we have a little bit of money each year and we do different marketing campaigns, and they've been fairly successful, and we're proud of what we've done. But these two have done some really interesting things in the Boulder County area and trying to get people to understand how to best share the road. And so it's kind of a new technique that we're going to take. Do you want to come and talk about it?
Good evening. As Betsy mentioned, my name is Jonathan Barch, and we are encountering or beginning a process of a collaborative dialogues to identify ways to increase safety, reduce frustration and conflict between all users on the roads, and as part of the Share the Road campaign. And just a couple pieces of the background, which is that we at CDR Associates were a facilitation firm in Boulder, were involved with the US 36 EIS, which was from I-25 to Boulder, and part of that was planned was a bikeway. And there are numerous, and we had a bikeway subcommittee and community dialogue around the alignment, about the best ways in which to avoid impacts, and a range of different kinds of things in terms of identifying the most community appropriate alignment and characteristics for that bike path. And that led to a dialogue in Boulder County, and particularly in the mountain canyons of Left Hand Canyon, James Canyon, Old Stage, and a couple others, about ways in which, in particular, to reduce frustration and conflicts, primarily this, and we pulled together groups of cyclists, motorists, mountain community residents to talk about that, to have data. We had some data, limited data to do that, but to develop some specific plans to do so. And this year, in fact, Boulder County and the communities have actually begun to implement a number of those programs, and that's really the vision that, when speaking with Betsy, to talk about how can we take this idea about that we need to get cyclists, motorists, community members, and all of those people that are involved with these kinds of decisions together to try to make positive change, and that's really the emphasis for this program. I'll turn it over to Joan to talk more specifics about that.
We are, again, I'm Joan Sabat, like Rabbit. We at CDR are facilitating the process along with CDOT to, here in Fort Collins, as one of the pilot communities, there will be hopefully 2 communities that we engage in this first step of the process with CDOT to revisit the Share the Road program, enhance the Share the Road program by engaging community members in a collaborative dialogue to see how can we improve the Share the Road program and also improve our community's roads, again, for all users of the roads, to make them safer, to make them more cooperative and friendly places to be, whether you're on a bike, whether you're walking, whether you're in a car. And so we will be having a series of meetings to discuss the issues, identify what are some real problems, and then also what are some strategies to address those problems. So whether it's the potential for a physical improvement that someone wants to help undertake, or a really specific educational strategy to coordinate with Share the Road, or a number of other initiatives that community members might bring to the table. In addition to having a stakeholder group that talks about these issues, we're also going to have a public meeting in the process so that members of the public will be able to come, hear the ideas that the group has come up with, and provide feedback and even introduce their own ideas. And so we're hoping that by, I would say, the end of January, we're going to have a really good set of plans for CDOT to enhance Share the Road, but also for the Fort Collins community to have a good sense of how to make the roads safer and more cooperative. So we would love to, if you have any questions, address any of those that you might have about the process. But it's a really exciting, we think, it was a really exciting group that happened in Boulder County, and we're hoping to replicate and even go further here in Fort Collins. And I know Betsy's really excited to get rolling, and hopefully you all are as well. But like I said, love your questions as we move through.
So that kind of sums up what I've been working on since I've left here. This picture was shot of me the weekend before I took my job, and that was 6 years ago. And this is the only time I've ever been able to use it. So if there are any questions that folks have, I'd be happy to answer as best I can from the standpoint of where we are and what we're doing.
One question I have is that I'm driving to and from the airport on what I think are freeways or interstates, something like that. I notice signs for bicyclists, please use shoulder, I think it is. Anybody here know what I'm talking about? On the tollway. Okay, so that's 470? Okay, on 470. And I've never seen a cyclist there. From my own point of view, riding anywhere near cars that are traveling 70, 75 miles an hour is not a favorable situation, but even more so, I don't know how you would get to those stretches of freeway. It doesn't seem like there's any access points developed for bicycles. That's one question I have. So maybe you could address that, please.
I actually rarely see people use it, but we don't restrict riders on it. And that's a policy that we strongly believe in, is that we only restrict cyclists for safety purposes. And there are only a couple of roadways where we do not allow bicyclists, and that's primarily on some of the interstates. But even on I-70, east of Denver to the border, you can ride your bike. It's getting into the mountain communities that we funnel you off onto different roads and bike lanes. And it is a state statute that says we can only prohibit bicyclists if there is an alternate route within a quarter mile. So that's good for you to know, because if, you know, Blackhawk, there's been some discussion about, you know, the ban down there and bicyclists not being allowed to ride on their main street. That's not a CDOT roadway, so we don't have any jurisdiction over it. But if it was, we wouldn't have a reason to ban bicyclists.
Betsy, or your colleagues, it would be really useful, I think, for this group to hear a definition of what CDOT share the road means. What does share the road mean?
Well, share the road means being courteous to other users of the road, understanding that you are not the only person that is using that roadway, that a roadway is designed for all users. And so to be courteous, be gracious to other people, be polite, and simply share the road with them. Recognize that you aren't the only user, and that goes for a bicyclist, a pedestrian, a skateboarder, a motorcyclist, a driver of a car, a truck. We all need to be courteous to each other and watch out for each other. Be careful not to injure other folks on the road, and it's basically a courtesy. Just share the road, be aware that you're not the only one on it.
Does CDOT have a policy on using shared lane arrows, also known as sharrows, on state highways?
Sharrows are actually a fairly new design that was just approved by the MUTCD. And the MUTCD, for those of you that don't know, is the Manual on Uniform Traffic Design. And it basically tells us what's legal for us to post as far as signs and what we can put on pavement and that sort of thing. And is everyone familiar with what a sharrow is? It's on a roadway, so that if you have a lane that is too narrow to include a bike lane and a car lane, you can combine the two so that it's basically on a bike route. It's notifying that this roadway is being used for bicyclists as well as motorists, but a sharrow has an insignia of a little bicyclist, and then it's got two chevrons, thank you, over the top of it, you know, like a sergeant's stripes over the top. And the placement on the roadway is so that if you're riding your bike and you're hitting that point of that chevron, then you're going to also avoid any car openings that are maybe parked on the side. We are starting to use those. Like I said, the MUTCD just approved the use of that. So, I mean, we'll incorporate that into our toolkit of other designs and facilities that help enable bicyclists and motorists get along better on the road. We don't have a specific policy. We just, you know, look at each case and decide what we think is best. Those are used more, I think, on local roadways, such as, you know, in communities rather than on highways and on, you know, on our state highways, because we don't identify any of our shoulders as specific bike lanes. So, you know, we just try and create a shoulder that's wide enough for people to safely ride on. The question was whether or not the Share the Road was in our driver's manuals. And if I could control the driver's manual, I'd probably put that in there. We don't, so it's not. I think we have been able to get a couple of questions in the driver's testing manual now that have never been in there before, so that's a step in the right direction. A couple years ago, though, and actually including last year as well, we did a program that specifically targeted all of the the driver's education schools. So we purposely put together a program, we reached out to them, and they included some of our information as components of their curriculum. And that was a step that we'd never tried before. And we had very good results from it. We polled all of, I think there were 35 or 40 schools within the state, and all of them used the information to some degree. So we felt that that was pretty good, and we're continuing to outreach to them and try and get them to build that in, because most people don't even think about it. Let's see, the first question is, am I trying to get roads better for people who are currently cycling or for new riders? My job is to improve bicycling and walking throughout the state. I don't care if you've never been on a bike before. If you get on a bike, I want you to be safe and to be able to ride and have a good experience. So, and the other part of my job is that I'm trying to get more people to do this. You know, my goal, my personal mission is that I want to see Colorado retain its current sustainability efforts and its clean air, when we have clean air, and blue skies, and all the things that make Colorado as great as it is. And I personally really believe that biking and walking are really big parts of that. That if we can get more people to ride for transportation, if we can get them to park their cars, we're going to have a better quality of life in our state. So I'm looking for, if you've been on a bike for 100 years, I want it to be good for you as well as for somebody new. And we do some outreach for, like when we're talking about new riders, for bike rodeos. We help people put those on. It's outreach to people that may not understand the importance of training kids when they're young, how to ride a bike properly. You know, a lot of people my age learned that you're supposed to ride against traffic. You know, well, that's one of the biggest crash problems that you can have. So trying to get parents to understand, you know, these are the right rules of the road. This is what you should be teaching your kids. That's what's important. We have to be able to work with different groups that may or may not agree with our mission. If you can get them to understand what you're trying to do, then you're a lot farther ahead than just preaching to the choir. I find myself working, as I mentioned earlier, a lot with health professionals and different folks that really are just starting to make some of the connections. I've been at the one of the chairs for the Active Community Environment Task Force with us through the Colorado Department of Health and Education, or Health and Environment. And that's been a great resource because we've been able to pull together planners and engineers and health professionals and help them talk to each other. Whereas sometimes planners don't consider the health effects of what they might be planning, and health professionals don't think about what planning can do for health. Well, as I mentioned earlier, that health also has done data collection for a long time. One of the things that they're finally realizing, and they have data to back this up, is that people who take public transportation and who bike and walk are folks who are less obese than those that don't. And when you think about it, it's like, well, that just makes sense, but no one has had that data before. And so now if we can work on how do you make those connections to transit, and a lot of times that's walking and biking. How can we make sure that we have cleared sidewalks? How can we make sure that the bus stops are clean for people to approach? Make sure that there are bike racks there for people to lock their bikes and leave them if they want to. Those are the things that I work on to try and connect all the transportation modes to make it easier and better. But it affects our health, it affects our air quality, our congestion. I mean, it's all those kinds of things. So I love that. I love having a mission and a passion that goes with it. And we all need the roads. And I'm not saying that I never drive my car or anything, but we need to be looking at how can we better use our communities and the resources we have without making more pollution and causing greater sprawl, and how can we make it healthier and easier for people to do these things. So that's my little soapbox.
Are there automated methods to get counts of cyclists using on-street bike lanes that are convenient? And the second question has to do with the traffic law that presently exists in Idaho that allows bicyclists, when they approach a stop sign, to not have to come to a complete stop, but to yield. Their responsibility is to yield to traffic that's there first, which from a bicyclist's point of view makes a lot of sense in terms of efficiency and economy of energy output, I guess. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the practicality of that approach being used in other states and what the pros and cons of that would be.
question regarding pros and cons of allowing bicyclists to sort of soften the rules of the road. And as your example, not come to a complete stop at a stop sign, but to use it as a yield sign. I'm very conflicted with that, because at times as a bicyclist I think that's really makes a lot of sense. And if it's safe, I should be able to, you know, go through an intersection and not have to stop, put both feet on the ground and be at a complete stop. You know, I understand that. But then I also get conflicted because under Colorado statute, bicycles are vehicles. And so you are allowed all the rights and responsibilities of any other vehicle on the roadway. So now if you start to say, but you know, when it comes to a stop sign, I'm not really a vehicle, I'm a bicyclist. Well then, you know, you kind of throw out all the things that you're arguing for, to have the same rights, to be able to control the lane on a roadway, to be able to turn from a, you know, into a lane and make a left-hand turn like you would in a motorized vehicle. So I have some, I don't know, internally I don't have a specific answer for that. I can't tell you if I'm pro or con. I can tell you that in talking to the people in Idaho, some love it and some absolutely hate it. And the bike coordinator hates it. So, and from the standpoint that, you know, how can you argue for the rights of a bicyclist, but then you don't really make them, you know, follow all the rules. So that's a tough one. And now I've forgotten your other question too. You had two questions. Oh yeah, counting bicyclists on bike lanes. We're actually in the process of doing that with, I mentioned the Kaiser Permanente grant that we're getting. Well, they're actually going to provide us additional funds so that we can put loops in the road. You have to have two different kinds of counting equipment when you're doing an in-pavement type of a count. You need the equipment like you saw on the post. That will count one type of person. And then you need the in-pavement to actually count the other type. So the in-pavement will count the bicyclist as they go across it. And then the counter on the post will count a pedestrian. So we're doing both kinds of counts, and then we can separate pedestrians from bicyclists. Right now they're grouped together. It's more complicated because obviously you can't just put a piece of equipment on a post and walk away from it. You have to dig up the pavement, and it's very tricky. It has to be a certain dimension underneath the pavement, and it's a different shaped diamond and all this kind of stuff. So first installation is always a little bit tricky, but Boulder is actually, they installed some just a couple of weeks ago, but we're going to be doing that around the state too. So we'll be getting back to you on how that works too. My goal is to hopefully find some locations that currently have not a facility, like not a bike lane specified on the roadway, do an installation, start getting some counts, then do an improvement on that road, like add a bike lane to it and continue the counts and see what the difference is. Because nowhere in the country can we find the information that tells us if you do a bike lane that your ridership will increase by X amount, or it may drop, or your crashes would increase, or anything like that. So I'm trying to get to some of those answers and, you know, move us forward. The question is whether or not we've tried any kind of colored lane markings for bicyclists, and we have done them for some pedestrians. In some of the areas that I'm familiar with anyway, in Denver metro area, we have done that where we've colored in the crosswalks. It's made a huge difference, and it happens to be we were doing a pilot real close to my office building, which is one of the highest crash areas in the state. So they made some nice improvements. We haven't tried anything on bike lanes yet. I think that that's open for discussion, and you know, we're always considering different things and different approaches. I think that in order to use color, we probably would have to get a pilot approval through federal highways to do that. I mean, that's your experience too, isn't it, Kathleen? When you're going to do if you've done something different that's not documented, then I haven't been to New York to see those, but I've seen photos of them, and I've seen them in California, I think, has done that too. So there are some different tests, and Some of the testing has shown that there's a kind of a false sense of security with the bicyclists, in the same thing that happens when you have a crosswalk, you know, that pedestrians have a false sense that they're, you know, safe from all motorized vehicles because they're within stripes. And that's what they're somewhat finding. But as far as making it more aware that from the motorist perspective, that, hey, there's something happening on this roadway and that there's, you know, I need to watch out for it. Huge increase, big increase.
Now that there's data showing that Bike to Work Day does have a measurable effect, has anyone thought about adding a secondary Bike to Work Day, like maybe in the summer or the fall when morning temperatures are a little bit warmer? I
think communities can do what they want to do. I think that, and Fort Collins has a winter Bike to Work Day, which I think is great. And I think Boulder does, and Durango has been considering it. From the state perspective, I don't have staff or time to do that. I mean, that's really what it just kind of boils down to. But I'm a big, big advocate that Bike to Work Day should not be Bike to Work Day. It should be try a bike, ride a bike anytime, you know, get away from doing this day. One of the things that I think would be really cool is if some of these breakfast stations, instead of doing them all on one day, said, okay, I'm going to do it the first Monday, and somebody else says, well, I'll do one Tuesday and Thursday, and so that all month long you just have these surprise breakfast stations popping up in the community, and gee, if you're a bicyclist, you get to benefit from it. I think that to me, that makes a lot more sense than having everything just crammed into one day. But I think that it does have it's a big factor in that we can identify, look at the possibility of what biking can do for a community. Look what we can really do when people want to get out and ride. I can't tell you the number of people that tell me, oh, yeah, I ride on Bike to Work Day. And then they never ride again, you know, and then they dust the bike off again the next spring and off they go. So that again, to me, I think it's a wonderful program. I'm glad that the state supports it. I mean, it's a legislative action that says the fourth Wednesday of every June is Bike to Work Day. So, you know, it's out of my hands as far as even what day it is. But I think that it would be nice to look at it from a different perspective and to say, you know, gee, maybe there's something more that we can do with this. And let's not make it a day, let's make it a lifestyle. Rah, rah. Who controls the content for the driver's manual? It's actually the Department of Treasury. Thank you. So actually we don't have any input as far as what they're testing for motorists for licensing. So I mean, that's just the bottom line. I do have to give credit to Bicycle Colorado because they have been making inroads into that. And have really done a good job in trying to get more questions and more information out that way. And that's a great starting point. That's something that I started on a couple years ago, trying to find contacts as far as how could I make some changes, and I just kept getting doors slammed, just one after another. So Bike Colorado has really done some good things that way.
John Cathalis' bill, House Bill 1147, had an educational component. Can you comment on that and what you see that holds for us in the future?
Yes, I sure can. We're actually in the process of developing, as part of our Safe Routes to School program, we're working with the Department of Education, and we're developing curriculum that we will make available to schools so that they can teach bicycle safety, bicycle and pedestrian safety within the schools. And we're working on a program that we're trying to work from the core curriculum, so that rather than, most people think about bike safety programs as being part of public or as physical education. Well, we don't want that, because we don't want it just to rely on, you know, one class is, you know, one time of the year. We want to work it into core classes. So you would look at, how do you teach bike safety as part of a math class or part of a science class or an English class? So that's what we're working on. That won't be available for probably, I'm betting 6 to 9 months at least. But in the meantime, we're also on our on our website, we do have educational resources that teachers can now download if they want to, that is from like the League of American Bicyclists for their bike safety. And we have a whole slew of resources that are already out there. The Cafalis bill did not provide any funding for any kind of development. So part of the discussion was that we would make available material that is already existing. And that's what's available right now. But like I say, we're working as part of our Safe Routes to School. We're developing curriculum because we think it's really important, and it's, again, we can't force teachers to teach it, but we can make it available to them. And working with Department of Ed, that will be a big step.
Clearly, education and outreach is an important element of your concerns, and also from our standpoint will likely be a pretty significant part of the process that occurs in Fort Collins, not just because it's part of the Share the Road program, but because it's an important strategy in addressing how do you get what Share the Road actually means out to people. And I have to go back to Boulder County to explain one element of this, and that is kind of the progression of how information can get out. We, at some of the first stakeholder meetings in Boulder County, was a lot of aha moments for people about, oh, when I honk my horn behind you, what reaction might that conjure up? Or when I drive around a bend and you're right there in the middle of the road, only going X miles per hour, and it's this much slower than me, this is terrifying for me as a motorist. I don't want to hurt you any more than you want to be hurt by me. And so it begins at kind of that grassroots level, which is a word that Betsy has talked a lot about as we've been designing this collaborative dialogue process. So while we don't necessarily have the answers to the questions about how can we educate people, what we're intending to do in the Fort Collins community is put the right people. And right when Betsy was talking about, okay, so there's all these people that are supposed to share the road, from skateboarders to pedestrians to motorists to dot, 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 dot. That how do we reach out and get all those stakeholders together in the same room to first educate each other? That's kind of the first step, is to tell each other what it's like, to give their perspective, and then to collectively identify some issues that they can strategize around. And also as a next step of, okay, so they've come up with all these great ideas. Well, what happens with those great ideas? The goal with this collaborative dialogue process is to find all these different community members. So for those stakeholders at the table to go back out into their greater communities, whether they're a motorist who really doesn't understand what it's like to be a bicyclist. They haven't been on one since they were 10 years old. To leave the table and go back into their greater interest group, you know, the rest of the motorists, and to find people who are willing to help implement some of these strategies. So to go out and educate people, whether it's through a motoring organization, or whether it's through law enforcement, or cycling clubs, any number of ways in which they can get the word out about what it's like for people to really share the road. So again, while we don't have the strategies, the goal is for this group to come up with really good ideas that meet all the users' needs, and that includes an education and outreach element to it, to get the word out, to help people know exactly what it means to share the road and how they can actually do that at a grassroots level, rather than having one organization handle it, having many organizations handle it from all different avenues, whether they're related to kids, motorists, skateboarders, whatever it might be. So I know that wasn't exactly what you were looking for, but that's really the goal of this process, is to come up with supported solutions to the problem rather than one group's ideas of what they want everybody to know. It'll be everybody's ideas kind of growing together.
I want to thank you all very much. I appreciate you coming here to listen to me go on and on and on this way. And I want to thank you for inviting me here.